an ephod and a teraphim in Micah's dwelling, and Micah had hired this guy to be this priest. The tribe of Dan comes along, and Dan more or less takes this priest away from Micah, and we learned that this priest was an apostate priest from Israel, but he was also the grandson of Moses.
Yes.
And we learned that there was a city by the name of Lachish was destroyed by the Danites, and the Danites rebuilt the city, and they established this priest in that city and a system of false worship in the city of Dan. And this precedence was done during the time of the judges. And this system of false worship, in which there is a city-state, albeit Dan was a small city-state, has some reflection and some bearing on the city-state of Israel under King Saul, when Israel desired to have a king rather than having God as their king. And these things are the precursors of what it meant to finally see the man of sin arrive in 538 AD. And in 538 AD is a legitimate result of the apostasies of the people of God from the past, particularly in the time of the judges and also in the time of King Saul in 975, in the time of Jeroboam. And it would lead eventually to the captivity of Israel in 605, 606 through 536, the 70 years captivity. It would lead to the return of the exiles. It would lead to the 490 years that you see here, that would be from 457 BC to 34 AD. Prior to this 490-year time period, there was a 490-year time period when they had not kept the Sabbath, the weekly, not the weekly Sabbath, but the sabbatical years, where every 7th year they had to rest. These are a Sabbath of years. And there were 70 of those Sabbath of years that they did not keep, like they were commanded to do in Leviticus chapter 25. And because they did not keep these for the 490 years, which were 70 Sabbaths of years, they were taken into captivity for those 70 years, that the land should enjoy her rest for the 70 years that she did not enjoy her rest in the 490 years. Yeah, I'm right in. Reading.
Hi.
Hi.
Now, one of the things that transpires in this account that I showed last week, that I want to show again before we get to the 7 weeks of Daniel 9:25, is that we all know that in October 22nd, 1844, since this is going to go on record, let's turn to Revelation chapter 10. And we're going to make it very plain and very simple that we are faithful and loyal Seventh-day Adventists in this Bible study, and that we do not believe that there is any more time prophecies after October 22nd, 1844. We believe that all time prophecies ended on October 22nd, 1844, and there are no more legitimate reasons to calculate any more time prophecies. And I want to show you this in Revelation chapter 10 and verse 6. This is the story of Revelation chapter 10, where it's an interlude between the 5th and 6th trumpet leading up to the 7th trumpet, where Revelation 10 brings in the history of the Millerite time period. That's this period up here from 1840 to 1844, where the first, second, and third angel's message came into history. We see in verse 1 that the mighty angel comes down with the little book of Daniel opened in his hand. And in verse 6, the angel says, "And swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are therein, and the earth and the things that are therein, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer." And we know that in 7th Bible Commentary, page 971, a comment by Sister White tells us that this was the end of all prophetic time.
791?
page 791, 7th Bible Commentary.
971.
971.
That's 971.
971. What did I say?
791.
Oh, 971. I'm a little dyslexic sometimes. Now, so with that being on record now, I want to point out to you that in this middle timeline, we have the 490 years of the Sabbath of years where they did not keep the Sabbath rest for the land. They were carried into captivity for that time period for 70 years. At the end of that time period, this is the return of the exiles under the first decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, Longimanus in 457 BC. One particular thing of note that you need to maybe put in your notes is that in 536, Cyrus is the one that God had called about 150 years before the event.
Yes.
Roughly in that amount of time. I might be wrong on that. It could be a little less. But within 100 to 150 years, in Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 28, Cyrus is named by the Lord as the one who shall build his house. I want you to mark that.
What chapter in Isaiah?
Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 28. And there's a similarity here in what we're looking at in some of this history that I recognized this week that I hadn't recognized before. We're recognizing there's a pattern that God himself is using. And what that pattern is he's using even Martin Luther, the great reformer in the 16th century, said that God even works out righteousness through evil. And in some respects this is true in all this history. One of the things that I learned this week in my studies was that in the Davidic kingdom under David in 1056, that's when there was a united Israel between all the 12 tribes. But by 975 we see Jeroboam and the golden calves. So we can do our math, and it's not much of there was not much time interval when Israel was really at the pinnacle of their existence. But in this time period, under the reign of Solomon, page 182. Notice what this tells us. I think this is quite... This book is called Empires of the Bible by A.T. Jones. I recommend you get it and read it. Empires of the Bible by A.T. Jones. And on page 182 he mentions something quite phenomenal about King Solomon, that he has something in common with Cyrus. Now, you folks have been studying here for quite a while, and I hope this will affect you as it did me when I read it for the first time this week. Notice what this says about Solomon. Solomon reigned 40 years. The first 20 in the service of God, the last 20 in the service of his wives and himself. The word Solomon means peaceable. He was so named 9 years before his birth. So he was named before his birth, as was King Cyrus. When David first suggested the building of the house of the Lord. So when David first got the idea, the grand idea to build God a house in Jerusalem, God came to David and said, "You're not the man, but I'm going to give you a son, and his name is going to be Solomon. And he will build my house." That's what God said of Solomon. 9 years before his birth. So it goes on to say, he was so named 9 years before his birth when David first suggested the building of the house of the Lord. At that time the Lord said to David that he should not build the house that he had in his heart to build, but behold, a son shall be born of thee, who should be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies round about. For his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his day. He shall build an house for my name. That is 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 9. Now turn to Isaiah chapter 44 and verses 21 through 28.
1 Chronicles 1, I'm sorry.
That was 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 9.
Thank you.
Now if you'll turn to the book of Isaiah.
22 verse 9. Isaiah what?
44.